What is up, YouTube? I'm Devon DaVinci, leader of the Renaissance crew, and you are watching DaVinci Reacts. Now today, normally I would do a Geography Now video, but there was a topic in one of the last Geography Now videos that I reacted to, and there was a subject that was brought up called the African World War, something that I'd never heard of in my entire life. And given the fact that, well, one, it's called the African World War, so it must have been a significant conflict, and two, the thumbnail for this video says that it was the deadliest war since World War II. I would imagine this would be something that would be newsworthy, maybe. So I'm kind of ashamed and also outraged that I didn't learn this. So let's watch this video, see what it has to offer. This video was created by Animated History. I will have a link, or actually the Armchair Historian. Animated History is a segment that he does on his channel. So the Armchair Historian is the one that makes this video, the channel. I will have a link for Armchair Historian at the end of this video. It'll pop up right around here. You can click on it and it will take you to their channel. You can watch their stuff, like, subscribe, all the other good stuff. And I will have a link for the original video in the description box down below. So if you want to watch the video in your own time, or if you want to watch it without me talking over it and pausing, or if you're a reactor and you want to do a reaction yourself, that is the link that you will use. Now, with that being said, let's jump into this and see what it has to offer. Now, this is probably will be a simplified version of events, so there will be some stuff that probably will get missed. If there's anything significant that you think I should look up on or read more about, talk about it in the comment section, and I'll be sure to go check it out. Now, let's do this.
Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace, the easy-to-use, all-in-one platform for building your website. Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. Today's video, the Second Congo War.
The Second Congo War is the African World War, I think. So I'm wondering what the first one is about.
The Second Congo War has been called Africa's Great War, and according to Reuters News, it is the deadliest conflict since the Second World War, although the death toll is still the subject of vigorous debate. What makes this subject difficult to cover is that as of this video's release, the conflict is still arguably going on, depending on how we differentiate different wars. Despite that fact, we'll do our very best to explain who's fighting who and why. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know we've got a Discord server up. We'd love to have you join. The link is in the description below.
(1994 to 1997).
The first thing that we need to address here is that the conflict was fought along both ethnic and national lines.
It seems like around this time, the 90s, there was a lot of wars involving former occupied or colonial areas. Like, it's like when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of places started to like fight for their own independence and things like that. And I mean, I don't think Africa had a lot of places that were like strongly influenced by the Soviet Union. So I don't think the reason this conflict is that. I'm pretty sure it's probably like more of like an ethnic thing that like there's a lot of different tribes and groups of people and things like that that already had some beef with each other, and it was just spilling out over time. But I don't know. I'm sure he's going to tell like the reasons behind why this conflict started. But I just found it interesting that like around this time you had what happened with the former Yugoslavia and all those other places. It's like, I don't know, it seemed like there would be a connection, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking on my ass right now.
Is that the conflict was fought along both ethnic and national lines. Like we've mentioned before on this channel, post-colonialism has been messy, to say the least.
So
As
it was
turns
kind of colonial.
When you draw national borders without any regard to pre-existing cultural identity, you tend to create countries full of people that, well, don't get along too nicely.
Yeah.
The most important transnational...
That's the biggest problem with the Middle East right now. The whole Sykes and was it Sykes-Picot agreement, where they just sliced up the old Ottoman Empire without taking time to consider the ethnic groups in that area.
Force in our story is the Tutsis, a loosely defined socio-ethnic
Oh, wait a
group
minute,
that
hold
have-
up. I gotta pause it just real quick. I'm sorry, I'm pausing a lot. The Tutsis. So this involves the Rwanda situation. I know about the Rwanda conflict. I didn't know that that was part of the African World War. Now this is getting interesting.
Our story is the Tutsis, a loosely defined socio-ethnic group that have historically lived throughout the African Great Lakes region. Most prominent in Burundi and Rwanda, they've long dominated the more populous Hutus in the same area. Why is that relevant? Because in 1994, the Hutus
Tutsis
perpetrated a large-scale genocide, mostly in Rwanda, inadvertently creating a Tutsi diaspora. We're going to come back to the Tutsis, but for now, just remember that a great many members of this historically powerful group were dispersed.
Through the violence was primarily directed towards Tutsis. Moderate Hutus that resisted the genocide were also killed or displaced. See, I thought he was going to get deeper into the Rwanda genocide, like why it started and everything else, and I believe it was something about the Tutsis like controlling the government, and the Hutus were upset because they represented the majority of the country, and they didn't want the Tutsis running them, so they kind of like rebelled and created their own group. I think it was the RUN, and they like went in and start like just killing Tutsis and stuff. Now that's obviously an extremely simplified or even a misinformed thing I just said, so if you know more about it, feel free to go in the comment section and let me know. But that's what I came under the understanding of it being.
First, all over the region. The second bit of backstory here is the First Congo War, which is arguably the same conflict as the Second Congo War. In 1997, Laurent Kabila, who led the Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo Zaire, overthrew Mobutu Sese Seko, the military dictator of the Democratic Republic of Congo,
I've been a
or
fan
later
of Paul
renamed the
McCartney and Michael
Republic of
Jackson.
Zaire. Kabila accomplished this with military backing from nearby nations, particularly Uganda and Rwanda, the latter of which at this point was once again controlled by a Tutsi-dominated government. Rwanda's motivation for removing Mobutu was to stymie cross-border raids by various guerrilla groups, including some Hutu extremists. Considering how small Rwanda's territory is, these raids essentially brought remnants of the previous Hutu government uncomfortably close to the capital. Uganda had similar concerns about the Allied Democratic Forces, a Sudanese-backed group that engaged in cross-border violence and kidnapping. And yes, the Allied Democratic Forces is a different group from the Alliance of Democratic Forces. Many of Kabila's forces
Again, this little message right here is very important. There are a lot of rebel groups that have democratic sounding names. They almost never live up to them. A lot of people will hear certain things and assume that because their names are described a certain way, that makes them a certain way. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard it with like the Nazis, the National Socialist Workers' Party. And they're like, oh, it has socialists in it, so that means they're a left-wing socialist group. No. It's the same with North Korea. They're the Democratic Republic of Korea. There's nothing democratic about them. There's nothing republic about them. So groups will get names sometimes because they know that certain names will attract certain types of people. Usually if you want to get support from the lower class or the lower middle class, whatever else, you'll try to name your group something that appeals to them, like socialist or democratic or something like that. So it's kind of like a way of hiding what your true intentions are behind fake populism.
From the Alliance of Democratic Forces, many of Kabila's soldiers were Congolese Tutsis, so they had a vested interest in creating a secure state that could defend their kinsmen. With the help of these and a few other outside factions, the AFDL were able to take control of the country in May 1997, marking the end of what is usually considered the First Congo War. Unfortunately for everyone
So
involved,
that's
the
what
peace
changed
lasted
Zaire
for
to
only
the
about a
Democratic
year.
Republic of
One of
Congo.
Kabila's first discoveries as the new leader of the Democratic Republic of the Congo was that it's a whole lot easier to invite military allies over for dinner than to ask them to go home. His government was awash with foreign military advisors, and many Congolese citizens began to wonder if their president was just a puppet of those who had put him in power. Meanwhile, those who had put him in power were really wishing they had a better puppet. Kabila was unable to stem the tide of guerrilla fighters raiding Uganda and Rwanda, and in fact, tacitly supported them. His hope was that by disassociating himself from the Tutsis that had put him into power, he might be able to establish a more reliable political base. Well, he succeeded in disassociating himself from them, so much so that his former allies invaded him.
Wow. And here we go. Only 2 years.
The direct antecedent of the
Technically,
war
only 2
occurred in
years.
July 1998, when Kabila dismissed his Rwandan chief of staff, James Kabarebe, and formally requested that all Rwandan military units leave the country. Instead, on August 2nd, the 10th Brigade of the Congolese Army, stationed in Goma and primarily made up of Tutsis, announced their defection from the government. These Congolese rebels eventually renamed themselves the Rally for Congolese Democracy, or RCD, and were backed by Rwanda and Uganda, who soon invaded in support. Or perhaps more accurately, the defecting rebels offered those two countries a retroactive justification for the war they already wanted. This coalition struck their first devastating blow 2 days later in an attack they called Operation Katona, led by the recently unemployed James Kabarebe. On August 4th, 200 Ugandan and Rwandan troops flew aboard 4 Boeing airliners stolen from Goma to the Katona Air Base, located just 250 miles away from the capital city of Kinshasa. The lightly undefended airbase was quickly taken as much of the garrison force defected to the Ugandan-Rwandan coalition. The rebels and invaders then used it as a staging area for further troops and supplies to arrive over the course of the next day. Combined with the defectors from the Democratic Republic of Congo's own armed forces, the rebels had nearly 5,000 troops within striking distance of Kinshasa by August 5th. This intrepid attack seemed poised to overwhelm the nascent government before they had time to put up any meaningful resistance. The situation was especially dire after they captured a number of cities in the Congo Central Province, including the provincial capital and Congo's most important port, Matadi. Just 3 days later, on August 13th, the invading forces took the Inga Dams, a critical target that provided power to Kinshasa. As this was occurring, however, it became clear that the Rwandan-Ugandan alliance had made a critical miscalculation. Unlike the fighting against Mobutu, the government of Congo had powerful foreign allies willing to come to its defense. Zimbabwe and Angola were the first and most important of these allies.
I'm curious. I know that countries will create all types of different alliances outside of like the UN and things like that. Does Africa as a continent have a type of UN alliance system, some type of UN type entity that all the countries can become a part of and have negotiations? Because there's a lot of wars and stuff going on in Africa, and I'm wondering, do they have something that gets everybody together and talk? Because it feels like around this time, and I'm not sure, he said some of the wars are still going on now, so I'm wondering it might be the case too. This reminds me a lot of like Europe during the 7 Years' War period, and like where everybody was just fighting for the sake of fighting and trying to expand their reach and stuff like that. What stopped Europe from constantly having battles was, well, I think one was having a overarching power that was able to like monitor everything with the United States and everything like that, but also the fact that like the UN got everybody together and you could have discussions and stuff, and you can settle conflicts or settle differences diplomatically. I'm wondering if Africa has something like that, because that will be the next step. I think that's something that needs to happen in order to try to quell a lot of this stuff. And also, of course, we need to figure out where some lines are going to be drawn again, because again, if these lines are still the same things that were drawn up during like colonialism, some stuff is going to have to change.
Providing air support and armor that
Let me know what you all
Kabila's
think.
forces desperately needed. These new players proved too potent for the invading forces, whose march to the capital was foiled by mid-August. In a neatly symmetrical development, the Rwandan-Ugandan invasion ended with another daring plane hijacking, this one at an airfield in Angola in September. Though the invaders retreated from the western portion of the country on their stolen aircraft, fighting continued in the country's northeastern province.
Instead of joining the original Rwandan-backed Congolese defectors, Uganda created its own alliance with backup, the MLC. We'll get into that later.
Orientale. By the end of the year, even more nations were drawn into the conflict on either side, in a tangled web of alliances that many observers thought reminiscent of the First World War. Aligning with Kabila's Congolese government were the already mentioned Angola and Zimbabwe, whose leaders had vested financial interests in his regime, as well as shared Marxist leanings. The Angolans were concerned about their own rebels, the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, or UNITA for short. Angolan President José Eduardo dos Santos suspected Rwanda and Uganda of backing the rebels, who had been a thorn at the country's side since the 60s. He was probably right before the war, but once it got started, their support for UNITA became overt. Up north, Sudan joined the Angolan president's cause as a means of harassing their enemy Uganda, while Chad joined mostly at the behest of France. That's right, France is involved too, ready to make up for its utter failure to do anything useful during the Rwandan genocide. Meanwhile, Namibia's president Sam Nujoma had personal ties to Zimbabwe and committed his forces in part to honor this friendship and to fight UNITA. There were a number of other independent or quasi-independent groups involved in the fighting, but the last two that we're going to mention are the Movement for the Liberation of the Congo, or MLC, and the Lord's Resistance Army, or LRA. If you thought there would be fewer abbreviations, you haven't been paying attention.
Isn't the LRA the group that's run by Coney? Y'all remember that? Coney 2012? I think that's the LRA.
The MLC was essentially a Ugandan-backed alternative to those Congolese defectors we mentioned earlier, the RCD, which was becoming increasingly influenced by Rwanda. Such an alternative became necessary as relations between the two initial invaders deteriorated over the course of the war. The LRA, meanwhile, is a fundamentalist Christian cult/militia that was founded with Sudanese support and remains at least nominally active to this day. It's most notable for its leader, Joseph Kony.
Okay, I was
With
right.
all of these new powers involved, a military stalemate of...
He is the self-proclaimed prophet who was the subject of the Coney 2012 campaign that Amnesty International ran when I was in high school. Look it up. It was weird. Yeah. I remember that whole situation.
Accentuated and would continue for
Then
the
ended
rest
up-
of the
well,
conflict, but only as far as large
I was about to make a South Park joke.
battles along the scale of Operation Katona.
You guys know what I'm talking
Make
about.
no mistake, though, blood continued to be shed during the brutal
you know,
proxy
you know.
battles that occurred from there on out. Throughout 1999, numerous peace accords, sponsored by the likes of Muammar Gaddafi and Nelson Mandela, tried and failed to bring an end to the violence. The RCD was not even invited to these accords, which may seem like a major oversight, but also a likely result of the fact that the group had splintered into competing factions. This newly fractured group was difficult to negotiate with holistically for obvious reasons. The next year, Ugandan and Rwandan forces actually began to fight each other as well near the city of Kisangani, one of the earliest rebel strongholds. With many of the nations involved both supporting and fighting both non-state actors in addition to each other, the prospect of a peace settlement that would end the multipolar conflict was growing increasingly complicated and unlikely. Over 5,500 UN peacekeeping forces did little to stop the violence. As the dawn of a new millennium came and went, the conflict seemed destined to remain a violent stalemate. The first major change in years occurred on January 16, 2001, when Laurent Kabila was killed by his own child soldier bodyguard.
Wow.
His son, Joseph, succeeded him as the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and by all accounts seemed to have a better head for politicking. Under a UN peace plan, Uganda and Rwanda began their long withdrawals that would be finalized under the 2002 Sun City and Pretoria Accords, while the RCD and other rebel groups at least nominally began the process of disarming. That process has not always gone smoothly, and occasional fighting still occurs, especially in the Ituri region. Having gone through all of that, we still have a fairly important question. Why haven't you heard more about this war? Part of the issue is undoubtedly the tendency of Western media and history courses to ignore the happenings of sub-Saharan Africa, but there are other factors as well. One of them is the complexity of the conflict, which pitted one faction against another,
I'm still kind of
only to bring
confused.
them together against a different faction, only to tear them apart yet again. Moreover, these myriad factions often employed guerrilla tactics, waging an asymmetrical style of warfare that defies easy summary. Other than Operation Katona, large-scale sieges and battles in this war are hard to come by. This is the most recent topic we've ever covered on this channel, and it is difficult to take an objective view on such contemporary events, but hopefully you come away from this video with a better understanding of this often unrepresented chapter of our recent history. Now, I want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Squarespace.
I'm gonna keep this in.
If you've spent any time on YouTube in the last couple years, I'm sure you already know what Squarespace is, but let us explain to you just how it can come in handy. Squarespace is a robust, intuitive, all-in-one website.
If you want to skip to the part where I start talking, you can, but
be useful to just
you should
about
feel bad.
anybody, whether you're looking to start a business, create an online portfolio, or more commonly, negotiate an end to a bloody geopolitical quagmire. Squarespace includes integrated analytics, built-in social media sharing buttons, and personalized email campaigns for when you really need to invite about 24 or so different rebel factions to your peace talks. Personally, this happens to me quite a lot, so I do recommend you go to squarespace.com/armchairhistorian and get 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain.
Okay. It is interesting when you think about African conflicts. There isn't really a lot of large-scale battles. Like, there aren't any real like operations, like Operation Desert Storm and Operation Rolling Thunder, like things where like a massive amount of troops come in and just like battle against another massive amount of troops. It seems like all the battles that take place in Africa tend to be like guerrilla warfare, kind of. Like, it would be interesting. Well, I was about to say it would be like, I could see it as being kind of disrespectful to, in a way, make light of situations like this. But this same thing happens with Western war, so I'll just say it. They need to come up with a video game or something. Like, there aren't really too many, or I can't think of any video games that take place in Africa. As far as like warfare and stuff, like the closest I can think of is like Resident Evil 5, and that's nowhere close to what I'm thinking about. I'm talking about like, why isn't there like a Call of Duty style game set in Africa, with you playing as a soldier in an African front battling against another African front? Like, imagine a Call of Duty type game that takes place during the Rwandan genocide, or during the battles in this where they were going across the Dominican Republic of Congo, or anything like that. Like, it'd be an interesting game. And because, like I said, how everything is kind of like guerrilla warfare and not necessarily like large scale battles, it would be, you would take it, you would learn from it from a different perspective. It wouldn't be the same thing as that you would normally see. Yeah, and also it'd be easier for me to learn because I've already told you guys a lot of stuff that I learned throughout history and stuff, I pretty much picked up through video games. Like, people say video games don't teach you nothing, but they teach you something. Almost everything I learned has come from some type of video game. When I was watching the History of the World video, I was amazed when I learned that the Byzantine Empire was just the former Roman Empire. I knew the Byzantine Empire from Civilization. I did not know what type of connection they had to the world. I just knew they were an empire, and that was it. So, to my surprise, like, oh, that's the Roman Empire. That's awesome. I didn't know anything about the Ottoman Empire. I didn't know that it was Turkey. I didn't know. I didn't know hardly anything about the Ottoman Empire, for real. So there's like a lot of things that I learned through video games. So if they ever make a video game related to this subject, I'll be all for it. But I will be reading more about this and like studying more videos about it, because this was very confusing. Like no disrespect to the Armchair story or anything like that, but after coming this, I don't feel like I learned a ton. Like I know names and stuff, but I still have like the idea of like why they were fighting and stuff like that is still kind of lost on me. So I gotta go and do some more research and try to figure out a way to simplify it so it can fit easy in brain. If you have any information you want to give in the comment section, feel free to do it. I look forward to seeing what you guys have to say. I will have a more Geography Now videos out in the future. The next one I'll probably do will probably be Rwanda. Now with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and give you the deuces. I look forward to seeing you guys in a future video. And until then, I'm Devon DaVinci. Hopefully you've been enlightened. And I'm giving you the deuces. And I'm signing out. Deuces.